What if everything you were taught about Jesus was only half the story? What if the name itself holds a secret that could change how you understand your own spiritual nature? Edgar Cayce, known as America's sleeping prophet, gave teachings that point to something extraordinary about the original name of Christ and why powerful forces work to hide it from you. Today, we're going to examine what Cayce revealed about the true name Yeshua and discover why this matters for your spiritual awakening right now. Chapter 1. Edgar Cayce's revelation about the sacred name. Edgar Cayce, in his psychic teachings spanning over 40 years, consistently referred to the Master not as Jesus, but as Yeshua. According to Cayce, the entity known to the world as Jesus was called Yeshua in his earthly incarnation, and this name carried specific vibrational frequencies that connected directly to the soul's awakening. Cayce explained that names in the ancient world were not mere labels. They were sound patterns that created resonance with spiritual forces. The name Yeshua, Cayce taught, means Yahweh saves, or salvation. But more than that, it represents a living vibration that awakens the Christ consciousness within each individual. Cayce made clear that he that was Jesus became the Christ, and he that is the Christ became Jesus. This wasn't just wordplay. Cayce was pointing to the fact that Yeshua the man achieved Christ consciousness, the same consciousness available to every soul. But why was this name changed? And what does Edgar Cayce tell us about the forces that wanted to control this sacred vibration? Chapter 2. The Roman Empire's calculated name change. Cayce's teachings provide a clear picture of what happened during the early centuries after Yeshua's resurrection. According to Cayce, the Roman Empire, particularly under Constantine, systematically altered the original teachings to create a controllable religion. The changing of the name was no accident. Cayce explained that when Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the goal was not to preserve truth, but to create unity under Roman authority. The wild, mystical movement that followed Yeshua's teachings threatened imperial power because it taught people they could connect directly with the divine. Here's what happened to the sacred name according to Cayce's teachings. Yeshua in Hebrew was the original name, meaning Yahweh saves. This became Jesus in Greek, which lost the breathy Hebrew sounds that carry spiritual vibration. Then it became Jesus in Latin, further removed from the original frequency. Finally, it became Jesus in English, completely disconnected from the sacred sound pattern. Each step took the name further from its original power. Cayce explained that this wasn't just linguistic evolution, it was spiritual suppression. The original Hebrew name carried what Cayce called the vibrational pattern of salvation, while the Romanized version became merely a label for worship rather than a key for awakening. Chapter 3. What Edgar Cayce taught about the power of names. To understand why this name change matters, we need to understand what Cayce taught about the power of sound and vibration. Cayce explained that sound is the basis of all creation. Every name, especially sacred names, creates specific patterns in the etheric field around us. The name Yeshua, according to Cayce, contains 4 Hebrew letters that each carry specific spiritual meanings. Yod represents the divine spark, the hand of God reaching into matter. Shin is the fire of spirit, the flame that purifies and awakens. Vav is the nail or hook that connects heaven to earth, spirit to flesh. Ayin is the eye of spiritual sight, perception beyond the physical. When you speak this name with intention, Cayce taught, you're not calling to someone outside yourself. You're activating the same spiritual pattern that Yeshua embodied. You're awakening the Christ consciousness that lives in your own soul. Cayce made this startling statement. Know that the purpose for which each soul enters is that it may be a light unto others, that the Christ consciousness may be manifested. The name Yeshua, properly understood and used, helps activate this Christ consciousness within you. Chapter 4. The suppressed teachings that came through Cayce. Cayce's teachings consistently pointed to lessons that were deliberately suppressed by early church authorities. According to Cayce, the original message was about awakening the divine nature within each person, not worshiping a distant deity. Cayce taught that Yeshua showed people that the kingdom of heaven was an inner state of consciousness. Cayce quoted the Master's actual words, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." This wasn't metaphorical language. It was literal instruction for finding the Christ consciousness in your own being. But this teaching threatened religious and political authorities. If people could find God within themselves, they wouldn't need intermediaries. They wouldn't need priests or kings or elaborate religious structures. They would become spiritually self-sufficient. The name change was part of a larger strategy to make Yeshua into an object of worship rather than an example to follow. By changing his name from the Hebrew Yeshua, which ordinary people could pronounce and connect with, to the Latin Jesus, which sounded foreign and elevated, they created distance between the Master and his followers. Cayce explained that this distance was intentional. They turned the way shower into the way itself, the guide into the destination, the brother into the king. Chapter 5. The Science Behind the Sacred Name. Cayce's teachings often referred to spiritual principles that modern science is only beginning to understand. When it comes to the power of the name Yeshua, Cayce pointed to what he called vibrational healing and sound therapy. Cayce explained that certain sounds create resonance patterns in the body's energy centers. The Hebrew language, being what Cayce called the tongue of the spirit, carries specific frequencies that activate what he termed the spiritual centers in the human body. The name Yeshua, when spoken with proper intention and breath, creates a vibrational pattern that activates the heart center, which Cayce called the seat of the soul. It also stimulates the throat center, the center of will and creative expression. The sacred name opens the spiritual eye, which is the pineal gland, and higher perception. Finally, it connects all energy centers in harmonic resonance. This is why, according to Cayce, the early church authorities had to change the name. If people learned to properly use the sacred vibration of Yeshua, they would begin experiencing direct spiritual contact. They would no longer need to depend on external religious authority. Chapter 6. The Lost Gospels and Edgar Cayce's Confirmation. Long before the Nag Hammadi discoveries in 1945, Cayce's teachings referenced lost teachings and hidden gospels that contained the original instructions Yeshua gave to his closest disciples. These teachings, given in the 1920s and 1930s, described texts that wouldn't be found by archaeologists for another 20 years. According to Cayce, these lost teachings described how Yeshua told his followers, "These things I do, you will do also, and greater things." Cayce taught that this wasn't a promise for the distant future, it was an immediate instruction for awakening the same spiritual abilities that Yeshua demonstrated. When the Nag Hammadi texts were finally discovered, they contained exactly the kind of teachings Cayce had described. In the Gospel of Thomas, we find Yeshua saying, "Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there." This points to divine presence infused throughout creation, not locked away in distant heavens. The Gospel of Philip, another Nag Hammadi text, contains this crucial teaching. "Those who say the Lord died first and then rose up are in error, for he rose up first and then died." According to Cayce's interpretation, this means that Yeshua achieved resurrection consciousness while still in physical form, and this same awakening is possible for every soul. But these teachings were suppressed because they pointed to immediate spiritual empowerment rather than future salvation dependent on church authority. Chapter 7. The Body Temple and the Rising Christ Consciousness. One of Edgar Cayce's most remarkable teachings concerned what he called the body temple, the idea that the human body itself contains all the spiritual machinery necessary for Christ consciousness awakening. Cayce described a process he called the rising of the life force through what he termed the spiritual centers in the body. This teaching closely parallels what the original text describes about sacred fluid rising through the spine, but Cayce's version is more detailed and practical. According to Cayce, there are 7 spiritual centers in the human body, corresponding to what Eastern traditions call chakras. When the name Yeshua is used properly, not as worship but as activation, it stimulates these centers in a specific sequence. The root center awakens life force energy. The sacral center purifies desires and emotions. The solar plexus balances will and personal power. The heart center opens love and compassion. The throat center activates truthful expression. The brow center develops spiritual sight. The crown center connects with universal consciousness. Cayce explained that Yeshua himself went through this exact process. He wasn't born as Christ consciousness, he achieved it through inner work. And the same path is available to every soul. This is why the name change was so damaging. The vibration of Yeshua specifically stimulates this awakening process, while Jesus became associated with external worship rather than internal activation. Chapter 8. Why the Church had to hide the direct path. Cayce's teachings make clear that the early Church Fathers understood exactly what they were doing when they suppressed the original teachings and changed the sacred name. According to Cayce, these authorities knew that if the people learned to contact the Christ consciousness directly, there would be no need for intermediaries. The path Yeshua actually taught was what Cayce called the direct way, immediate connection with divine consciousness through inner work. But religious institutions needed what Cayce termed the indirect way, salvation through external means, requiring their services as intermediaries. Cayce described the difference between these two approaches. The direct way, which was the original teaching, said that Christ consciousness is your natural spiritual state. Awakening happens through inner work and divine connection. The kingdom of heaven is within you right now. You are called to become what Yeshua became. Salvation is immediate when you awaken to your divine nature. The indirect way, which became institutionalized religion, taught that Christ consciousness belongs only to Yeshua or Jesus. Salvation comes through belief in external doctrines. The kingdom of heaven is somewhere else, reached after death. You are a sinner who needs an external savior. Salvation is a future event dependent on church authority. Cayce stated, "The Master came to show the way, not to be the way. He came to demonstrate the Christ consciousness that is the birthright of every soul. But if people understood this, they wouldn't need to depend on religious institutions for their spiritual connection. They would become spiritually self-sufficient." This threatened the power structures that were being built around the figure of Jesus. Chapter 9. The Practical Application of Yeshua Consciousness. Edgar Cayce didn't just give theoretical teachings about the name Yeshua. He provided practical instructions for how to use this sacred vibration for spiritual awakening and healing. Cayce described a specific meditation practice using the name Yeshua. First, you prepare physically by sitting upright with spine straight. Place feet flat on floor. Rest hands gently on thighs. Close your eyes and breathe naturally. Next comes attunement. Begin by acknowledging that you are seeking to awaken the same Christ consciousness that Yeshua embodied. This isn't worship, it's alignment with spiritual reality. Then practice sacred breathing. Breathe in slowly while mentally saying, "Yea," pronounced "Yea." Hold the breath gently while mentally saying, "Shu," pronounced "Shu." Breathe out slowly while mentally saying, "A," pronounced "Ah." For heart activation, place one hand on your heart. As you continue the breathing pattern, feel the vibration of the name resonating in your heart center. This is where, according to Cayce, the Christ consciousness first awakens. Develop spinal awareness by continuing the breathing pattern while visualizing warm light rising up your spine from the base to the crown of your head. Cayce taught that this represents the life force carrying Christ consciousness through all your spiritual centers. Finally, integrate the practice by placing both hands over your heart and silently affirming, "The Christ consciousness that was in Yeshua is awakening in me." Cayce emphasized that this practice isn't about becoming someone else. It's about awakening who you really are at the spiritual level. Chapter 10. The Signs of Christ Consciousness. Awakening. According to Cayce, when you begin working with the true name and teachings of Yeshua, specific changes start happening in your consciousness and daily experience. These aren't dramatic supernatural events, they're natural spiritual developments that Cayce said every soul is meant to experience. The first sign is increased spiritual sensitivity. Cayce described how people begin noticing synchronicities, having more vivid spiritual dreams, and feeling guided in their daily decisions. This happens because the Christ consciousness connects you with what Cayce called the universal mind. Natural healing abilities also develop. Cayce explains that as Christ consciousness awakens, your ability to help others heal naturally increases. This doesn't mean you become a miracle worker overnight, but you do become more sensitive to others' needs and more effective in offering comfort and guidance. Inner peace and clarity emerge as well. Cayce taught that true Christ consciousness brings what he called the peace that passes understanding. This isn't emotional numbness, it's a deep knowing that you are connected to divine love no matter what's happening in external circumstances. A service orientation naturally develops. According to Cayce, authentic Christ consciousness naturally expresses itself in service to others, not from obligation or guilt, but from genuine love and recognition that all souls are interconnected. Direct spiritual guidance also becomes available. Cayce describes how awakened individuals begin receiving what he called direct guidance from the Christ consciousness. This comes through intuition, meditation, dreams, and what Cayce termed the still small voice within. Chapter 11. Why this matters for your spiritual path. Today, Cayce's teachings about the name Yeshua aren't just historical curiosities. They're practical instructions for spiritual awakening that apply directly to your life right now. In our current time, many people feel spiritually hungry but disconnected from traditional religious approaches. They sense there's something more to spirituality than belief in external doctrines, but they don't know how to access direct spiritual experience. Cayce's teachings about Yeshua provide a bridge. They honor the historical master while pointing you toward your own spiritual development. They respect the wisdom of ancient traditions while making that wisdom practically accessible. When you understand that Yeshua was not just a historical figure, but a demonstration of what every soul can become, your entire spiritual path changes. Instead of waiting for salvation from outside, you begin awakening the divine nature that's already within you. Instead of feeling separated from the divine by your humanity, you begin recognizing your humanity as the perfect vehicle for divine expression. Instead of looking to external authorities for spiritual truth, you begin developing your own direct connection with divine guidance. This is what Cayce called the New Age, not a time period, but a state of consciousness where individuals take responsibility for their own spiritual development and learn to embody the Christ consciousness in daily life. Chapter 12. The Great Awakening. Cayce predicted. In his later teachings, Edgar Cayce spoke about a time when these suppressed lessons would become widely available again. According to Cayce, given in 1939, the time will come when the true teachings of the Master will be restored to the people. Cayce taught that this restoration wouldn't come through religious institutions, but through individuals who were ready to take personal responsibility for their spiritual awakening. He called these individuals the New Mystics, people who combined practical spiritual practices with active service in the world. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts in 1945 was the beginning of this restoration. Suddenly, scholars and seekers had access to the kinds of teachings Cayce had been describing for decades, teachings that emphasized direct spiritual experience over institutional authority. Today, with access to information and spiritual practices from around the world, we're living in the time Cayce predicted. The ways to achieve spiritual awakening are more available than ever before. The question is whether we'll use them. Understanding the true name and nature of Yeshua is one of these ways. It's not the only path to Christ consciousness, but it's a powerful and direct one. And according to Cayce, it's becoming available again precisely because humanity is ready to take the next step in spiritual evolution. Chapter 13. Your personal practice with the sacred name. Based on Cayce's teachings, here's a practical approach for working with the name Yeshua in your own spiritual development. For daily attunement practice, each morning spend 5 to 10 minutes in quiet reflection. Place your attention on your heart center and slowly repeat the name Yeshua 3 times. Don't think of this as prayer to an external being, but as attunement to the Christ consciousness within yourself. When using the name for healing work and facing physical, emotional, or mental challenges, Cayce recommended using the sacred name as a healing vibration. Breathe the name into the area of difficulty, visualizing divine light filling that space with healing energy. For service preparation, before engaging in any form of service to others, whether it's your job, family responsibilities, or volunteer work, silently invoke the name Yeshua as a way of aligning yourself with the consciousness of loving service. During evening integration, at the end of each day, review your experiences and ask, how did the Christ consciousness express through me today? Where can I allow it to flow more freely tomorrow? Use the name Yeshua as a focal point for this reflection. Continue study and application by reading the words attributed to Yeshua in both canonical and non-canonical sources, but always with the understanding that you're studying instructions for your own awakening, not just admiring someone else's spiritual achievement. Chapter 14. Living the Yeshua teaching in daily life. According to Cayce, the true test of spiritual awakening isn't in mystical experiences, but in how we live our ordinary daily lives. Cayce stated, "The Christ consciousness is not something apart from daily life. It is daily life lived from divine awareness. This means bringing the consciousness that Yeshua embodied into your relationships, work, and daily activities. It means treating every interaction as an opportunity to express divine love. It means seeing every challenge as a chance to develop greater spiritual strength." Cayce taught that this is what Yeshua actually did during his earthly ministry. He didn't spend all his time in mystical trance states. He lived an active life of service, teaching, and compassion. He demonstrated that Christ consciousness is meant to be expressed in the world, not hidden away from it. When you work with the name Yeshua in this understanding, you're not trying to escape your humanity, but to sanctify it. You're not seeking to become something other than human, but to become fully human in the way that divine consciousness intended. Conclusion: reclaiming your spiritual heritage. Cayce's teachings about the name Yeshua point to a simple but revolutionary truth. The same spiritual consciousness that was embodied by the historical master is available to you right now. It's not something you have to earn through belief or good behavior. It's your natural spiritual inheritance. The changing of the name from Yeshua to Jesus was part of a larger process of moving people away from direct spiritual experience and toward dependence on external religious authority. But that time is ending. More and more people are ready to take responsibility for their own spiritual development. Understanding and working with the sacred name Yeshua is one way to reclaim this spiritual heritage. It's a way of connecting with the original teachings that emphasized awakening the divine nature within yourself rather than worshiping it outside yourself. The Christ consciousness that Yeshua embodied is not his exclusive possession. It's the spiritual capacity of every soul. The name change was designed to make you forget this truth, but the truth cannot be permanently suppressed. Your spiritual awakening doesn't depend on believing the right doctrines or belonging to the right religious group. It depends on your willingness to awaken to who you really are at the deepest level, a spiritual being having a human experience with unlimited capacity for divine expression. The sacred name Yeshua is one key to this awakening. Use it wisely, use it with love, and let it awaken in you the same consciousness it represents, the consciousness of divine love actively expressed in human life. As Edgar Cayce said, "You are gods in the making." The same consciousness that was in Christ Yeshua is your spiritual inheritance. Accept it, develop it, and express it in loving service to your fellow beings. This is the message that was suppressed, the teaching that was hidden, the truth that threatens no one except those who profit from keeping others spiritually dependent. The name is Yeshua. The consciousness is Christ. The awakening is yours.